Let's talk about that right now with Jake Wallis Simons. He's the editor of the Jewish Chronicle. He's also author of the brilliant book, Israelophobia, the newest version of the oldest hatred. Jake, thank you so much for joining us.
You have me.
Let's just start with, I mean, I want to ask you about Prince William as well first, but let's just start with these different proposals. Now, we're still waiting. I'm surprised it's taking this long. PMQs has already started, but Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Commons Speaker, had a meeting this morning where we've decided on what amendments are going to be debated today. So we know that the SNP have got an opposition day motion. They have tabled their motion, and that's going to be voted on no matter what. Labour tabled a motion as well, slightly different wording. A lot of people saying this is semantics, or is it a big U-turn? Tories have tabled theirs. Now, the general procedural rules and conventions of the Commons mean that if the government has tabled a motion, then the Labour motion won't be voted on. I don't know why. I don't think anyone really does. And so that would mean Labour politicians, Labour MPs, many of whom will very much be supportive of the SNP motion, are left in a bit of a bind. Do they defy the whip and vote with the SNP? Do they vote with the government, etc., etc.? So it all becomes about political, hand-wringing. But do any of these motions matter at all in the big scheme of things, given what is actually happening right now, today, in Gaza?
I think a lot of it really is about, as you just said earlier, about domestic politics more than what actually happens in the Middle East. And I think often Israel becomes that. It becomes a symbol for our own political posturing rather than the real place and the real people who are dying and the security issues that they face. You see that with expressing views on the two-state solution a lot of the time. The two-state solution is very, very unlikely to happen anytime soon, mainly because the Palestinian side is so infested with extremism. And yet people still quite happily say that we must have that solution, we must have that solution, because they're really thinking about themselves and how that makes them look. And I think that you see that playing out once again today, as you've said, in Parliament, with all these different parties trying to position themselves on which side of which semantic phraseology they land with respect to the fighting, the end, the humanitarian pause, the immediate ceasefire, the not so immediate. And in the end, it doesn't really matter, because Israel has to defend itself and will defend itself as we would if we were in that same position.
And that's the thing, isn't it? But we constantly have calls, on all sides, as if I was thinking this is almost like a parent coming in and seeing their two children fighting and saying, both of you stop it. Sorry, one of these is a democratically elected government and a close ally of ours and the only democracy in the Middle East. The other is a terrorist organisation whose founding documents say not only do they want destruction of this state of Israel, they want every Jew in the world to die. And they want to go about educating their own people to carry out those deaths. Now, and murders. I mean, I'm sorry, you're not dealing with two equals at this point. So saying all sides is, frankly, a naive way of putting things.
Exactly. And, a democratically elected government is about as close as this world has to a moral good. And jihadism is as close as in fact, it is an absolute evil. And when faced with a good and with an evil, there can be no instincts to triangulate between good and evil. You have to choose one side against the other. This is a mortal struggle that the Israelis find themselves in against an enemy that wishes to destroy them in the most barbaric and savage ways, and has attempted to do so with some success just 4 months ago. You cannot be seriously suggesting that that is in any way morally equivalent to a flawed democratic country, the only democracy in the Middle East, which is just trying to defend its citizens. And this instinct to triangulate good and evil is really quite bizarre, and speaks really about the way in which the West falls into narcissism, thinking about what this says about me, how I'm fair-minded, I'm not privileging one side over the other, rather than looking at what this is, which is a battle of as close as we can get to good in this world against what we definitely can say is evil.
The rhetoric has been certainly ramped up, and we know that, we spoke to an SNP representative earlier today, that the SNP will have tabled this not just to virtually signal their views, but also to put Keir Starmer, Labour Party, in a difficult bind. We know last November there was another SNP motion along similar lines, and that led to 56 Labour MPs rebelling against the whip and voting with them. 10 resignations from the front bench. Causes a lot of embarrassment and difficulty, undermining Keir Starmer. Tories quite happy to join in on all of this. Keir Starmer, I think, frankly, I'm surprised that he has held as firm as he has on this issue for as long as he has. But again, not known for holding firm on many views over the years. But the SNP Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn, he has ramped up, as I say, the rhetoric. This is what he had to say this morning. He said, this is a pro-life motion. It's pro-protecting civilians from the death and destruction of one of the most advanced militaries on the planet. And this is what a lot of this is about, isn't it? It's like this idea of proportionality. So 1,200 innocent people in Israel lost their lives. There seems to be some idea that, well, OK, well, if you killed 1,200 innocent civilians in Palestine, that would be about right. Maybe a bit more because, they did it first. But like 29,000 Palestinians have died. We're told civilians, I think a lot of those would be including, 10,000, I think, as Hamas soldiers as well, included in that. But this idea of there being a proportionate number of deaths that is allowable, and above that you cannot go. What is the appropriate number of innocent children to be killed in these circumstances, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, it's just breathtakingly ignorant of the context, the history, and the security concerns, and the strategic decisions that face the only democracy in the Middle East at this point. Voting for a ceasefire right now is not pro-peace. It's not pro-life. It's pro-death, just the deaths of Jews rather than the deaths of the terrorists who seek to kill them. Because we have to recognize that if Hamas continues to exist, it will, and has stated this in terms, carry out more October the 7th again and again. Other terrorist groups on Israel's borders will be emboldened and carry out their own versions of October the 7th, with the ultimate unified goal of destroying Israel and savagely destroying every single Jewish and Arab Israeli life within its borders. And so that is what Israel faces. There can be no compromise with destroying Hamas. The very existence of Israel and its population is at stake. And so that really must be seen through. And to suggest that a ceasefire now is pro-life is totally ignorant and wrong. A ceasefire now would allow Hamas to continue to exist and in the end herald what we really fear, which is more savagery, more destruction, ultimately aiming to dismantle and destroy the world's only Jewish state. And there's one more point I would make, which is that just that if you support a ceasefire now, which allows Hamas to continue to exist, you cannot then say that you want a two-state solution, because Hamas oppose with every fibre of their being a two-state solution. They command about 70% of support of Palestinians at the moment, according to the latest polls. If Hamas continued to exist, there's no two-state solution. So either you have the ceasefire or the two-state solution. You can't have both.
But can Israel actually destroy Hamas? Because Hamas is not just the men with the arms and the ballistic missiles. It is also, the education that's gone on in Israeli schools. Thanks the UN for funding all of this through our tax dollars and pounds. Basically telling them that actually their main aim in life is to kill Jews. And to take the land from Israel. So, Hamas is an idea as much as it is military men. Realistically, Israel isn't going to. They could kill every single Hamas fighter in Gaza. They don't destroy Hamas, the idea.
Yeah, there are two separate battles that need to go on, really. The first is the military battle, which is most important right now because that's the most urgent. And that will have to involve an operation in Rafah, because Rafah is the place where the tunnels come in from Egypt, where the arms come into Hamas. So without taking Rafah and destroying Hamas there, Hamas will be able to rearm itself. So there's the military dismantlement of Hamas, which is most urgent. But after that, you're right, there's the overcoming of the Hamas ideology, which is a much more difficult and long-term business. And I can only compare it really to World War II, after we defeated the Nazis militarily with some overwhelming force, by the way. After that, there was a program of denazification which took place in Germany and an equivalent one in Japan. Now, that was very, very draconian. There was the death penalty, for example, that we meted out to anybody supporting the Nazis then. But in the end, it worked. I'm not suggesting the death penalty against Hamas followers in the modern day and age, but at the time it worked and brought Germany into the modern powerhouse, economic powerhouse and liberal democracy that it is today. So it can be done. Doesn't mean it's easy, doesn't mean it's always going to work, but it is the only choice that we actually have in front of us
It can
right
be
now.
done. Can I ask you what Prince William's had to say? And a lot of it actually just, platitudes that most of us would agree with. We'd like an end to fighting, more humanitarian aid, and we don't want so many people to die. He's been criticised, some, I'm saying, for platitudes, and others actually for meddling in political affairs of which he does not perhaps understand the significance. What do you make of what he had to say and comments about it?
Well, I'm sure that they came from a good place. The prince wouldn't speak out of any kind of ill will, I'm sure. But nevertheless, they do come across as being really quite naive. And the thing that stuck out for me was him saying that we all want, we don't want to see any people being killed.
Yeah.
There have been too many deaths. And I think that I felt that from an Israeli point of view, Israel didn't want any deaths in the first place. Israel did not want to have to fight a war in the first place. It pulled out of Gaza in 2005 to enable that enclave to become peaceful and prosperous and not under occupation, and was rewarded by it becoming a terrorist strip, a terrorist fortress that has then launched this savage attack on Israel, forcing it to defend itself. So the Israelis don't want war. They want peace. They don't want any deaths. Even one civilian death is one too many. And the Israelis know that from the beginning. Preaching to them from on high, from Windsor Castle or wherever, doesn't help. They know that already. They are fighting for their lives. And what we need really is a bit more nous, a bit more understanding of what Israel faces and what the world faces, so that we can actually begin to try to think how we can win the peace rather than simply call for it in a sort of hand-wringing way.
Jake Wallis Simons, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.